Everyone, welcome to the first show and tell for the Supporting Dementia Care project. My name is Genta and I'm the delivery lead for digital innovation at LOTI. It's really good to see actually so many familiar faces and new colleagues as well join us today. So please, can you take some time to introduce yourself in the chat? We'd love to know who's joined us for this session. Please can I also invite you to stay on mute for the first part of the session. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions right at the end. But in the meantime, if you do have questions as my colleagues present, then please do put those in the chat and we'll address them either at the end or there and then. I think I'd like to do a very quick introduction about the project before handing over to the Helix team. So this project is part of the Digital Inclusion Innovation Programme, which is a 2-year programme led by LOTI, funded by the GLA, with an overall remit for tackling digital exclusion in London. This is an exemplar project where we're hoping that the tools and methods that we test here can be replicated in other areas of public service. And the overall aim of the project is to design and test solutions that equip community support groups with the right skills and knowledge to provide digitally inclusive services to people affected by dementia and their carers. We are working very closely with the Helix team, which is part of Imperial College London, to deliver this project. And on that note, I think I will hand over to Matthew, who will tell us a bit more about the project and the purpose of the session today. Over to you, Matt.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, there we go.
Hopefully sharing my screen too. Yes, my name's Matt. I'm a designer at the Helix Centre and very pleased to be talking to you today. Thank you for making the time. I'm going to give you a summary of our project to date. As Genta said, we are from the Helix Centre. We are a design and innovation lab based within Imperial College, St Mary's Hospital, working in healthcare and design. But we're also part of the UK Dementia Research Institute at the Care Research and Technology Centre, which is based at Imperial College and University of Surrey. And my colleagues, Kat Kilkenny and Sophie Horrocks, are working with me on this project. So a little bit of background, and I'm going to assume that people in the audience are new to this project, although I recognise that some people aren't. So forgive me if I'm covering old ground, but I just wanted to present the whole story, if you like. So the background is that people with dementia were some of the worst hit during the COVID pandemic and most isolated during this time. A report from the Alzheimer's Society showed that actually dementia was the most common pre-existing condition for people who died with of COVID-19, and people with dementia suffered some of the worst excess deaths during this period. But we also saw through our work in the UK Dementia Research Institute that people with dementia people affected by dementia found it harder to change their daily routines to adapt to lockdowns and pandemic precautions, and of course they were very vulnerable to the disease as well. So we started looking at ways to support community objectives. Sorry, so some very funny noises coming from someone putting off, someone chewing maybe. I don't know. Okay, thank you. But more than that, isolation has been and continues to be a challenge for this demographic. And we went through a phase of community dementia support, trying to use digital tools and digital techniques to reach out to their members and the people they work with varying degrees of success through the pandemic. But now that community support is beginning to return to in-person meetings, I think there's a challenge and a benefit to keeping various aspects of the digital skills and connections that were developed over this period, and seeing how we can use those to reach perhaps the most isolated and most excluded people in our community. So that's the background of what we're trying to address. And how we do it, well, we're looking to develop digital approaches to tackling isolation with people with dementia and carers in the community. And we want to do that by co-designing with boroughs, with voluntary community sector, and with people affected by dementia to come up with ideas and solutions that are informed by the need and the people that use them, and are going to continue to support them. Quick overview of the project. It's quite a short project for a subject this big, perhaps, but we started in September and have been working through a definition period, exploring the various factors at play, working with LAs and community organisations to understand and prioritise the opportunities and the challenges, particularly with a sort of a London focus. We are into phase 2 now, where we're looking to co-design solutions with voluntary community sector organisations and with people affected by dementia themselves. And then there's a phase 3 from February to April, where we'll be testing these ideas and documenting and sharing those experiences for others to learn from and contribute to. So a quick summary of the where we've got to. We started off with workshops with boroughs, with community organisations, with a couple of NHS organisations to gauge interest and understand previous existing projects, uncover the challenges and opportunities, and then vote on the desirability of various possible areas of focus that we uncovered in those workshops. And we came up with a range of insights from those workshops, and here's just a sort of a selection. Ideas around trying the technology using iPads, laptops or tablets, etc. Training digital buddies who are experts in technology to visit and support individuals who live alone. Our wish for guidance and affordable technology. Using everyday consumer technology is cheaper and less stigmatizing than specialist assistive tech. Supporting existing peer-led groups to deploy and use technology, and that tackling isolation and loneliness becoming a higher priority for boroughs to mitigate later health problems. It's just a flavour, but they sort of fell into 3 camps or 3 groups of insights that could be summarised along these lines. That there are 3 things that can be addressed, or 3 approaches. One is thinking about the hardware and the physical devices that people could access and use, and how appropriate they are for their needs and their motivations, and even their fears of technology. So we could, there were insights and ideas around devices. Another approach was to think about software and what tools and resources they're accessing once they've got a connection to an online connection. And then the third is thinking, particularly in the context of isolation and our interest and brief, is to think about how they connect to communities and how they feel a sense of belonging once they're online, and how they, how we actually address the feeling of isolation through the technology. So we took those 3 approaches and came up with 3 broad areas, three concepts that we could focus on, and brought them back to the participants in this project to get some feedback and direction. So these are kind of provocative, high-level concepts that I'll walk you through quickly. The first is hardware focused, and it's this idea of matching the device to the person. And so the broad suggestion was we'd create a library of different devices, from everyday consumer devices like Facebook Portal or Amazon Alexa, to tablets that have been adapted for easier access for this demographic, to specialist devices that have been custom designed specifically for this group. And what we'd do is we'd set up a system of exchange or loaning or trial and error with different devices, mapping them to individuals' needs to find something that suited them, suited both their accessibility requirements, but also their motivations and the reason that they might want to start using them. And I think form factor is an interesting question to address with this. I mean, there's something to be said for there's a huge difference between a tablet that gets put away in a drawer and forgotten, for example, or runs out of charge, and actually a tablet that's housed in a picture frame like the Facebook portal that is a permanent piece of the furniture and remains charged, remains in the same place, and remains more accessible and part of someone's life. Also interesting issues to think about around privacy and vulnerability, which we'd like to come back to. So it was the idea of this was to focus on, you know, what's the right device for the right person, and come up with a process for trying and selecting the optimum solution and having a flexible system of allowing people to swap devices as their needs change. The second approach was around a similar sort of idea, but concentrating on software and taking managed devices. So these are would be a sort of typically an Android tablet or possibly an iPad that is managed remotely by a service that has a dashboard. So, for example, a community organisation or a borough could set up and manage these devices and make them available to people, which would allow remote customization of the device. So the addition of apps or reduction of apps to make functionality available, or the remote delivery of support or training on how to use it. Perhaps the ability to prompt and remind people to join group activities. And actually, it works on the basis that we give someone the physical hardware, and then we can tailor a program of support and introduction through changing the software and monitoring their use and supporting them to use it in order to achieve the goal of joining a community online or and other ways of addressing isolation. So it's more of a software approach. And then the third concept or idea was to concentrate more on the purpose and the reason for getting online, specifically with an eye on isolation. And that's sort of thinking about group activities. There are, you know, activities that work very well in the community and are highly valued, such as singing together. Singing for, you know, is good for many reasons for people affected by dementia. Others include group exercise or perhaps art therapy or art sessions as well. And some of those have been adapted quite well to digital or online versions during the pandemic. For example, it's reasonably easy to set up an exercise class, a chair exercise class, and have people follow it online from home. It doesn't require too much two-way or group communication for the main activity. You tend to just sort of follow the leader or the coach. But singing, I think, has been far less successful, yet highly valued. So as groups are moving back to having sort of in-person music-based sessions, we want to sort of propose that we could see if we can evolve the ideas to create a hybrid singing group that allows people to join remotely as well as in person, and make sure that by taking the time now to design that way of doing things, that we can make sure that the remote experience is meaningful and that people feel fully engaged, and that it addresses that sense of isolation. So it's thinking about the purpose rather than the means. That's really where we're at the moment, and we are very open to feedback and suggestions on those three directions. They're deliberately quite broad still. We're very happy to share them here and get feedback here, or you know, after this event, you know, whatever means is helpful. But we're starting to see a way in, you know, a preference for how these three ideas might turn into one emerging focus. So this is our sort of suggestion to you for feedback. You know, we'd love to know what you think, and tell us if you think it's wrong. But you know, the initial feedback we had was that the hardware approach shows an awful lot of moving parts that's very hard to control. There's an awful lot of possible devices out there, and the practical steps of perhaps implementing it might be unfeasible. Each device with each platform would bring new data privacy challenges. You know, relationships with Facebook and Amazon might not be ideal for this scenario. And the practical steps of swapping in and out devices might be a lot to think about at this moment. So there seem to be we seem to be steered towards more of a software approach and more of a managed device approach, thinking about how we could perhaps take one device or compare a couple of similar devices and services for those managed devices to see how they could be used and adapted and to create a person-centered approach and guide for introducing this technology and supporting people to use it, with a real focus on us thinking about the usability, accessibility and purpose from a person-centered individual point of view, to counter the sort of more business side of evaluating these services like cost and availability and things like that. So to really give the individual's voice a prime role in selecting and commissioning technology, and to combine that with developing, you know, thinking about the third concept and developing a template or two for hybrid group activities, so that we kind of join the dots between, you know, both aspects of getting people a device and getting people connected and giving them a reason to try it and persevere with it and do the training and work out how we can get people to feel a sense of community when they get online. So just, I'd love to come back to that and get your thoughts and feedback, just to sort of wrap up on what we think will make this a success. Is now, you know, we've consulted boroughs to a certain extent so far. Now we want to emphasize our work with, you know, getting to the coalface, working with voluntary and community sector organisations to also reach people affected by dementia directly, so that we really understand and work with them to co-design these ideas and solutions. You know, it was important that we get multiple communities engaged, that we don't want to just work on the needs of one group in one area of London. We need a range of experiences and settings to make sure that we're thinking of everything that we need to, and just to make sure we get a deep and effective engagement with these tools, so that the feedback is useful and the guidance is useful and meaningful after the end of this project. So our next steps are to formalise those relationships and get co-design workshops with community dementia support groups in 3 or more boroughs, and pilot and test the solutions with people living with dementia. And we might be able to do that in their homes if it's safe to do so, or in communities face-to-face settings to test the technology in a more simulated sense, and we're working that out. And then our aim, is to develop a person-centered protocol for selecting and introducing technology for people with living dementia, as well as the template for a hybrid activity or two that gets people connected. I think one question we'd love your thoughts and feedback on, I think safety's come up as an issue very firmly and recently is, if we're introducing these sort of technologies to people's homes, especially if, the most isolated who live alone, how do we make sure that we're doing no harm, that we're not making vulnerable people more vulnerable through giving them a greater digital connection? There's elements of responsibility and control of the devices and who we're letting in through that digital door, if you like. So, any experience or thoughts on how we can sort of be aware of and tackle that issue would be great. And there's a sort of the practical vulnerability and sense of safety, but there's also the feeling of, safety. People, I think, are afraid of technology. To some extent it's justified, and to some extent it's it can be mitigated. So we need to think about how we make people feel safe as we introduce technology, so that they want to use it and increase that chance of success. That gives us about 10 minutes for comments and discussion, I think. I hope that all makes sense, and yeah, look forward to your comments. There's contact details there if anyone wants to get in touch with us after the conversation. We're particularly still looking for opportunities to involve community groups, people with dementia, in those developing and delivering those in those three locations. I'll stop sharing my screen, perhaps. Has that worked?
Yep.
Great. Does anyone have any comments or questions? And at this point, criticism is just as good as anything positive. I see a hand up from Jerry, I think.
Hello, Matt. It's just really important. The things you highlighted there really fit in. I'm just speaking from the experience because I did run a pilot with a handful of people with dementia back in summer last year, just to get quickly into it following that first lockdown. Now, one of the most important things really when we are getting the device, the size of the device, is the size of the group, because we saw that when there were more people in the group, people with dementia got a little bit confused in terms of how they see and identify who else is in the group. So that is really important to note. The other aspect was, I know you talked about safety of the device in terms of the technology, but also there is safeguarding individuals. Who is the right person to go and actually enter into the house of an individual who is vulnerable? Are they properly vetted? So that is important when we are looking at training the digital bodies, which actually one of the most important things came from the exercise I took. I think Kat is going to arrange a meeting with myself, so we'll discuss that a little bit more. Kat, I can see you nodding your head. So we'll talk a little bit more about my pilot, and I think we can get some planning from there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. It's really helpful. I'm looking forward to that conversation too, and hopefully learning a little bit more from your pilot, which I think that was singing based as well, wasn't it? Sonia, I see you've got your hand up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. That was really interesting. I had a meeting with Kat last week, and we're very interested in supporting this new venture. I suppose to me there's two things which I discussed with Kat. One is the legacy of the pilot and what happens in terms of the devices once the pilot is over, and how we can work together with local authorities or corporate partners, etc., just to make sure that the devices can stay with the users. And the other question, I suppose, is about safeguarding, as you mentioned at the very end, and who are we partnering with, or would you be responsible for uploading all the necessary software just to make sure that no other sites can be downloaded by mistake, or pop-ups come up, or cookies and all that kind of stuff that make be an additional threat, so to say.
Yeah, thank you. They're both really good points. I think the legacy one, in response to your conversation with Kat, we started talking about it, and we you know, as we work that out, your input would be good. I mean, I think you have a preference for, or suggestion that people should keep devices. Yeah, there's Jerry's nodding as well, so we can work on that. I guess if it's a very managed service, you know, it's more than just leaving the devices. You've got to leave a system of the management in place as well. You know, and that relates to your second point, Sonia, I think, about, you know, avoiding all of that, those complications on the devices is achieved by having the right, you know, management dashboard, management software, and someone supporting it, and not just sort of leaving them alone with the device once we've finished. So it's going to be tricky, I think, just to work out, make sure that we can set something up and try it out and make sure that we can leave it and that there's enough support in place to carry it on. But I think that's something we should aim for, certainly if that's the feedback from this group.
Just to say, it's just one of the incentives, Matt, in terms of the device, because it becomes personalized, because the individual gets attached to it. Yeah. And it's one of the things when I did my pilot, and that was one of the things. It was an incentive.
Well, I think it feels like the right thing to do, and it's not I don't think it's a cost issue. It's the main issue is the vulnerability and making sure people are supported afterwards, I think. But yeah, heard loud and clear. Hi, Peggy, I see you've got your hand up.
Hi, I was just curious if there was any interest, or if you've heard people flag up the position of the early onset or young onset dementia. And we've just finished and had a dementia strategy adopted in Hammersmith and Fulham, but I know it's different in RBKC. So some groups look at the early onset as a different column on a spreadsheet, and I just was wondering where your thoughts were about earlier young onset dementia.
That's an interesting point. I don't think we've given it specific thought, and I think we could be or should be open to including it, or including participants with that. It did play into that first concept around hardware devices, and we had a couple of conversations about the idea of, you know, especially with younger people or people earlier on in the dementia journey, getting them used to a simpler device that can last longer through their dementia journey and as the dementia progresses. So I think that there's certainly, I've seen from, you know, personal experiences and others around that, you know, at the early stages, you know, the younger people are familiar with the technology. They can use their laptop and they can use all the devices that have all the functionality, but they gradually lose control of it. But actually, if there was an early introduction of something, you know, like smart speakers or simpler devices or iPads, which might at first seem oversimplistic to them, one hypothesis is that there's potential for that device to last longer and remain accessible for longer. So we had a few conversations about that. I don't know if we haven't really got the opportunity to test that within this project because of the time scale, but it could be something that we set off in motion perhaps, or look to build on, especially if we can leave devices with people. But again, there's a question, you know, when people are younger and earlier on, there's a question of whether we'll get such useful feedback for really addressing isolation in the most isolated and the most vulnerable and the people who are living alone. I mean, another thing that came up, I'm just aware that our time's ending, is that there's a big difference between people who are living alone in their ability to access this technology and people who've got someone at home who can manage and set up the device. And you know, that became more apparent, I think, during the pandemic, but now is possibly an opportunity to focus on those living most isolated, or those that need most support, perhaps. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for your time. I see a few people need to leave and appreciate it. I really appreciate the time you've given to us to come today. I can't see any other questions. Genta, is there anything else to add?
No, nothing else from us, just to say thank you. Thanks to you, Matt, and everyone who's here. Please do contact us. We'll share the slides shortly, but contact any one of us and we'll be very happy to follow up with you. Thanks very much. Have a good day.